Folks, welcome back inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3733 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming to you live on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. And we can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. Without further ado, I want to bring in a guy who's been improvising melodically for maybe the last 50 years or so. Comes from a long line of musicians, from his father to his brother. And he's currently in the Heart of Gold band with a myriad of cats. An honor to connect with him. Brian Godchaux, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake. Glad to be here.
You know, I wanted to, you play the violin, and I wanted to play you this clip from an interview I did, and just take a listen to the content of it, and then we'll come back and break it down, okay?
Sure.
He was, in fact, the opening act for Dizzy Gillespie in a theater in Paris. And I was more familiar with Dizzy Gillespie, to be honest. And John Coltrane had just started his own band. He had left Miles Davis. I think it was his second time in Paris. I had missed the first. But so the music, it was a shock. It was a musical shock. One of my early big musical shocks. I could not understand everything they played, especially rhythmically with the drummer, the kind of beats, and so I almost had a headache, to tell you the truth, coming out of the theater after his performance. But then it stayed with me for the next day or even 2 days. Like I couldn't stop thinking about this music, and so I started listening to his albums and got into his music then.
Can you? All right, Mr. Godchaux, do you know who that is?
It's probably Ponty.
You nailed it. Good for you, man. Good for you. So I interviewed Ponty, that was March 16th of last year. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the same thing, the idea of when you first heard or saw John Coltrane, and how you tried to interpret that vocabulary into your own music.
Well, it's that's a very complex question.
Welcome to the welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Coltrane had such an incredible depth of basically knowledge of the language of jazz, which he was so deeply into, just immersed in, and then came up with his own voice. So it's like, as far as interpreting, bringing it into my own playing, I definitely said it encouraged me to be more experimental and try different things. You hear stuff, and it's hard. I think you integrate stuff over time. It takes time for anything like that to happen. You might have the initial shock, for example, of hearing that for the first time, but it's quite a challenge to put all of the influences together.
Where were you at in your playing before you heard him, and then what kind of experimental stuff did you do after you heard him?
Well, I heard him probably quite in my 20s or something, or teens, and I guess first time I really got into experimental kind of jazz was with this guy Henry Kunz in Berkeley. I played he was totally, he's still around. I still play with him once in a while. He had a band called Opie, and played just totally, he was a free jazz musician, and I started hanging out and playing with him and getting into the thing of on the violin, you have to permit yourself to make other noises than often may be permitted on the violin in classical music. For that, you try to stay away from squeaks and stuff, right? But in the language of like especially like I guess Ornette Coleman and stuff, you utilize all those different sounds of the violin in quite different ways.
I'm curious about just the idea of, what kind of jazz were you listening to prior? I mean, really, Ornette was coming out. I mean, Ponte, I guess, saw him probably in the early 60s because, I mean, cats like Jimmy Cobb or just his drummer would say that when Train would start to just sort of blow at this time, women would get up in the audience and say, make him stop, please, and
yes,
and
where you make noises which are not like necessarily pretty.
Right, and then and I guess that what I really wanted to talk to you about was this. To me, it was like there was this mantra, unspoken almost, Miles, Lee Morgan, Train, where it was like, hey, listen, the audience, you guys might not dig. We dig what we do, and you guys may not dig it. We hope you do. But if you don't, we're still going to play because we're burning inside. And I wanted you to personalize that, even with this cat that you mentioned, who you started to play with in Berkeley. How did you become emboldened enough to develop your own sound and be yourself on the bandstand?
Oh well, that's again a very complicated question because it kind of depends on which bandstand you happen to be on and what people you happen to be around. It's kind of determined by that. So, I guess as a violin player, I was more into older jazz, Stuff Smith, Stéphane Grappelli, the Hot Club of France, Django Reinhardt. So I think I got into that for quite a while, and playing jazz. From that standpoint, acoustic instruments. So you don't really often get to play with horn players, for example. So in my own playing, I assimilated that. I don't really consider myself a quote jazz player. I mean, it would be hard put to really define what kind of player I am or what genre I would play in. So all the different guys I would listen to, you get in. It goes into your ear and into your, hopefully makes it into your soul and heart at some point, and then that becomes a part of your vocabulary.
Could you talk a little bit about the kinds of gigs that you were playing? Tell me this guy's name again that you were playing with in Berkeley.
Oh, this is Henry Kuhn. He's quite well known in the free jazz. Friend of Henry Kaiser.
Right. So and you can. Yeah. What year was this approximately?
Oh, that was probably the early '80s.
Oh, in the early '80s. So I guess how long did you stay? Were you guys in Seattle for? Did you move when you were a kid? Do you have any memories of Seattle?
Oh no, my family moved from Seattle when I was 3 months old. We moved to Los Angeles, Van Nuys, where my dad's family was residing. And so I grew up pretty much in California.
So, and your dad was, I guess he considered himself to be a pretty good, he considered himself to be a marginal musician, or semi-professional, but steeped in Dixieland. Is that right?
No, my dad was from the South. He was born in Louisiana in a little town called Bunkie, which is sort of between Opelousas and Alexandria. And soon after that, his family moved to Texas, and then he grew up pretty much in Kansas City. And so he was involved in music then he was quite interested in becoming an opera singer. So he studied that, studied at the school there in Kansas City, and ended up going on the road with his uncle, who was a song and dance man, and who and kind of had, I guess you would say, vaudeville / burlesque shows.
Exactly.
So he had, so he got into that from that, but then got back into more serious opera and went to Chicago and studied with some of the big European teachers there. Quite dedicated. It was sort of a frustration to him. He was a baritone singer and kind of on the cusp of being a tenor. So kind of didn't really make it in the opera world as a tenor, just voice problems, and then the war came along. But he was totally a musical fanatic, I would say. He was totally interested in that.
When you, what years did you move out to Los Angeles?
That was 1951, the year I was born.
Wow! So he was immersed in what was the West Coast jazz scene of that time too, I assume. I mean, this is...
No. My dad was more of a classical band musician, opera and such, and but also growing up, he was always had a church choir. He became a church choir director. I grew up in Concord, a little town. We moved from Los Angeles in 1954 to Concord, which is in the East Bay. It had about, I guess at that time, about 17,000 people. Very small town. Now I think it's more than 100,000. But he, became a school teacher there and directed the church choir and was very involved in the musical theater group, which was just starting out there. It's still in existence, the Contra Costa Musical Theater. So I grew up listening, aside to classical music and hearing a lot of, church music. Being Keith and I would go to all the choir practices, etc., and sing in the junior choir and such. And then my dad would put on these, Music Man and Man of La Mancha, kind of all the traditional musical theater chestnuts.
Did you?
So I heard all of that.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating stuff. Talking to Brian Godchaux live here on the Jake Feinberg Show on Power Talk. Could you talk about you and Keith going to the Sanctified Church, or the first time that you were? I mean, there was a cat named Charles Sullivan who basically ran the Fillmore District. He owned all the black clubs, and he had this Chitlin circuit that went through Concord and Martinez and Hayward and all these great towns. And there were I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the first time that you saw, R&B gospel music in a live setting outside of the choir, the more Anglo setting.
Well, you have the Anglo choir, but there was also quite a bit of, I would say, there was a good bit of spirituals. Also they did. So there was, as far as R&B, that came quite later. In my teens, I got interested in that, but it was quite, not till when I was maybe 16 or so. I think my brother and I went, and a couple friends, to see Paul Butterfield Blues Band, probably at the Fillmore. And that was the first time I totally got the hit of live, loud blues or that kind of stuff. And it was quite amazing, and I think my ears never stopped ringing since.
For the audience, I'm 39, and for my daughters and future generations, could you just unpack what was so inspiring about this music? I mean, it was a mixed-race band. Butterfield grew up on the south side of Chicago. But what was it in your mind that opened that was so enlightening for you about that?
Well, actually, you know, it's kind of different to see stuff live and then to suddenly see actual people on stage projecting it with full force. And it definitely was, you know, not square, shall we say. Very
So I mean, this is what I'm getting at, because what is, can you just parse square versus raw in the Brian Godchaux mind?
Well, you know, square. Now, if we go back to my family, my dad was could play jazz and swing, and his style was quite. I would say it was square. He didn't really quite grasp the rawness or just I don't know, the blackness of it. You know, the he would play. You know, I guess you could say he played pretty white, which is, I would say, square is sort of that.
Okay, no, this is so. No, you're nailing this. But is white? What does white mean? Does it mean playing 2-beat time? Like, what is white versus black? This is just so essential, because the reason I opened up with that Ponte comment is just because of the wailing, burning quality of the African American classical music known as jazz. And
right.
But that didn't. I mean, I'm producing a film documentary on Stan Getz, and Stan Getz in 9th grade was on the road with Jack Teagarden.
Well,
and
right.
Getz acknowledges that during that time, that's how he learned to improvise. So, I mean,
right.
I'm just trying. Why don't you, if you can parse that, that would be great.
Well, I have to say that one of the things that, as far as listening as a kid around the house, that records would be around. You know, one of them was definitely Stan Getz. I mean, something about that sound. Maybe it was like sort of like a location, California, the sound of the vibe out here. You know, so it is quite it's difficult to put into words how all those things fit together. But yes, the influence of black people, African American people, in our music is just incalculable. And I guess I always try somewhat to keep some of that feeling in whatever I'm playing. You know, just it's practically inescapable.
I dig. I mean, this, because once you move to Concord, first of all, how old are you? Older than Keith, or who is older? You still with us? I think we lost Mr. Godchaux. We'll have to get him back on the line momentarily. Just give us 1 second here.
When you are
Hi, it seems to, hello?
Yeah, no, we started to talk about Keith, and things got disconnected right there. So I was going to say, who was older?
Keith was 3 years older.
So I'm curious as to when you guys wound up in Concord. Could you talk a little bit about the musical games and the kinds of things that you guys would do to keep to stretch your ears out? Mainly because and also ultimately the first gigs that you played. I know Keith was doing. He was playing country cocktail jazz and doing things like Misty, Groove Holmes kind of stuff. But I'm just curious about some of those early collaborations that you guys did before he became really a professional musician.
Well, yeah, we actually grew up playing, as far as what we would play together quite often would be like duets, classical music. He would be playing piano and I would play the violin, or he would be playing off. He would play the flute, duets within the classical thing. And at some point, he got interested in playing other stuff, and encouraged me to do that. He would have sort of started garage rock bands in Concord, and so I would kind of hang out and listen to that. And at some point, I started playing along, trying to figure out, well, what do you play on the violin in this context? So yeah, he definitely, I guess, probably had, not for his influence, I probably would have still been playing classical music, but he kind of encouraged me. So that's where I got started, trying to figure out, well, what can you play on the violin other than classical music or church music or show music? That pretty much, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, this is so interesting. I think it's important because we don't have the burlesque clubs. We don't have the touring circuits today.
Right.
And jazz, in my mind, when I listen to it, it's so formulaic. You can't really even tell who's playing because it's been classicalized or polished or whatever you want to say.
Right.
So here it is. You have two brothers, with limited resources. And I just would love you to take us on a journey. I mean, was it when you guys would play in a duo and you're on the violin and he's playing flute or piano, like, how did you make it stimulating so that you would stretch the music out from just the classical setting, where you would make it like a game? So many of the cats did these games with people. They'd sit in their apartments all day and just, if they were drummers, they'd work on these different grooves, and one guy would sit at the trap set, maybe one guy would play vibes. But I just wanted you to, I just figure as brothers, you guys were definitely creating games that were helping you stretch your ears, and I wasn't sure if there was anything you could talk about specifically that came to mind.
Well, for me, it was this way, playing in the context of playing without notes. The classical thing is all you play with notes. So at some point, if you kind of are coming out of that tradition, you have to figure out how to play without notes. That means you have to sort of understand the musical structure and play off of that. And that was quite difficult for me. It's like, well, what notes do you play? So I think, and I was like, well, if it's the key of D, or a D chord, you could play a D note. So I knew that. And I knew, basically got from that to like trying to be able to play over a simple blues chord structure, which was quite a mystery to me. It was like, it's not really a textbook that I came across that told me. And Keith was not really, he was, I wouldn't say he was the kind of teacher that could, or person that could actually lay out how to do this or that. He was quite natural about it. It came very natural to him. So I kind of had to find my own way. Like, well, what do you play here? Well, keeping the feeling of the thing, and like, where's the notes?
Absolutely.
Where are the notes?
Yeah. So he was.
Where's the sound?
Right. This is. Was there a time in your career where one reason, because I've interviewed a lot of cats that grew up in Philly and that used to rehearse with Coltrane, before he became really big, when he still lived down there, and they would go through every tune in every key. And basically,
right.
To me, it was like that. Where did your ears grow the most in your early career?
I guess I spent, as far as my early career, I started playing the violin when I was 8. So I spent really the large part of my early career sitting in practicing scales and arpeggios endlessly. All the keys, just trying to map out the fingerboard of the fiddle, figuring out how to get a sound out of the fiddle. And kind of a lot of time doing that, just figuring out how do you physically play this instrument. That was a huge part of it. And when you kind of figure out, well, you could speak, say, the classical language with this ability you have to move your fingers and hands, and you have your ears, and from then it just continues. And I would say I'm still quite on that journey. I'm still learning. Never stopped.
So when the garage band scene came in, you were emboldened though to plug in a wah pedal. I mean, when did you become?
Well, no, I didn't do that. What it was Keith had rented some amps, and I think he was playing bass. He had rented himself a bass, so we were playing bass, and he got me a little DeArmond pickup, which I put on the violin and plugged into the one amp, one of the amps we had, and that was kind of a new world right there. It's like, wow, what is this? How do you approach this? All of a sudden, the violin sounds much louder, so it tends to be harder to control. You have a lot of bad sounds, but you don't want to make big bad sounds.
Right. Could you speak to some of the I mean, I've done several interviews with Richard Green, and he says that he was the first to incorporate an electric violin into a rock setting with C-Train. But I was wondering,
right?
I was wondering if you wanted to talk about a few cats that were. David LaFlame was an inspiring cat, but who?
Well, it's funny. I would hear these. I would hear David LaFlame, and of course, early on, Dan Hicks of Hot Licks, and so I would hear that, and I was kind of not wanting to have that sound on the violin. Again, I was like, very classical sounding. I tended to like violin in that context, which wasn't really classical sounding. One example, very early, is this record of Ravi Shankar and Yehudi Menuhin, West Meets East. And I fell in love actually with Indian music and that sound. And but when I would hear Yehudi Menuhin play it, he sounded like, totally very classical tone, very classical phrasing, and I kept wanting to hear him not sound like. What would the violin like? And
I love this. I love it.
But I just did also. In those days, you hear the Beatles, and they would have the sitar, and I would down a string section, which kind of had some of the Indian tonalities. And I kind of, that was at the sort of the same time I was trying to figure out, what could you play on the violin. But again, I was kind of looking for a sound which was not, to be frank, not really white sounding, not with all the whole European baggage of the European sounding violin. Quite, very precise intonation, very precise vibrato is a big thing. What do you do with the vibrato on the violin? That's a very important thing. That kind of defines somehow where you're coming from.
This is fascinating because you talked about Keith being somewhat of a natural musician. Could you talk about what his greatest strength to you was as a mentor? Prior to him becoming part of the phantom ship known as the Grateful Dead. I mean, basically, it was like, I mean, basically that was, I mean, part of my show is predicated on leadership. And, Keith was an accompanist, but he also, Donna and him had this amazing band. I've interviewed Stephen Schuster about it. And I part of me wanted to believe that in fact you also got a chance to play in those gigs as well, maybe once in a while. But I just wanted you to talk a little bit about his leadership style, what he brought to the table, and how he communicated things to you. If everything was sort of naturally based.
Yes, well, it was kind of like he was quite different in that. He was just really quick. in learning. You know, he was quite natural. He, you know, my childhood was like you would hear me practicing, like I said, endlessly scales and blah, blah, blah. He would sit and kind of, you know, you'd say almost noodle at the piano or very quietly work things out and then be able to play them. Whereas I had to work quite hard to be able to play well enough to play with people. And I think that kind of developed slowly for me. After Keith started playing with Grateful Dead, I think I hung out quite a bit, but more as I was trying to write songs. That was more my role at that point, was trying to write lyrics. So we never really played together that much. I think some in the studio, but most of my playing and my abilities playing developed sadly after he was gone.
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, so you were, in terms of songwriting, what was the impetus for that? I mean, what were you there trying to write songs for your own group, or were you writing songs?
No, I was right. Well, Keith and I had tried for some years, part of the garage band. Well, we would try to write songs. So I would be writing lyrics, and that continued right up to the point where, you know, Keith and Donna joined the Grateful Dead. Just before that, Keith and Donna had been living in Berkeley, where I was living and going to school, and my folks were living. We had a big house there, and Keith and Donna had a summer sublet around the corner, and they would come over and work on music, and we would try to do a bit of recording and made a little demo of several tunes, and later on, when they did the Keith and Donna album, I was around and contributed some on that. So that was.
Could you talk a little bit about how you built songs? And I mean, where are those? Have those tapes ever seen the light of day? It would be fascinating.
Oh, probably not. No. I think they're probably long gone. I don't know where they're gone. But yeah, the writing thing is, it's not like I'm a prolific writer, but every now and then if I apply myself, and it happens to be the time when a certain song might choose to appear, then I will, you know, work with it. And sometimes it manifests into a tune which is played, and other times it just kind of hangs out somewhere. Where do all the songs that never are quite written where do they hang out? Well,
so you were living in Berkeley at that time. I mean,
yeah.
Is that when you first connected with David Nelson?
No, you know, that was actually, I first connected with David Nelson soon after Keith and Donna joined the Dead, and he was quite, you know, again, I was trying to figure, well, how do I play the fiddle? You know? So he encouraged me and gave me some advice early on about, you know, how to set about, you know, I knew I wanted to play bluegrass. That was something which I became quite interested in. And it's not something you could just kind of pick up and play. It takes some real some work on the fiddle to get so that you could play the tunes, understand, and just understand the language and begin to be able to speak the language on the fiddle. Yeah. So Nelson kind of set me off on that, and also Garcia was very encouraging, and would talk to him, and he was encouraging me to play, learn bluegrass. So I kind of set out to do that, and I'm continuing to do that. And actually, I'm playing, I know Sandy Rothman.
Yeah, I know. I'm a big fan of his, man. I love that guy.
So we get together quite regularly. We've made a couple of CDs of banjo fiddle duets, and The odd thing about, I mentioned the garage band thing back in the 60s. One of the people that kind of showed up in that the garage that Keith somehow knew was Sandy Rothman. So this was, and he did a stint for a couple of sessions in the garage band. And so it was quite remarkable some like 20 or so years later when I started hanging out with Sandy and playing with him.
So he was a young Sandy Rothman who at the time
He was a young Sandy, I think probably about the time he had just got back from his trip back east with Garcia. So it was, he was back home and checking things out, and they had some mutual friends. And
did you get a chance to see? Yeah, I mean, some of these cats that, it could have been Richard Green, but then Garcia brought in Vassar Clemens as well. I mean, what is the idea of? I would just love to get the Brian Godchaux definition of improvisation, because there are cats like, Tom Bones Malone, who was, in the original Saturday Night Live group, plays in the Blues Brothers, and amazing trombone player. And he'll say that, any music that has any kind of instrumental, any music can be improvisational. And I wanted you to talk about your concept of improvisation.
Improvisation, I guess, is like sort of the simplest way to think about it. Is, in the classical sense, would be like you have the theme and then you have variations. So you have the theme of the melody and the structure of whatever piece you're playing, and one might state the theme, and then the next time around, you will play something else over that, and you kind of make it up, from your kind of box of tricks or licks or whatever it is, the notes that sort of exist there in your mind, and quite quickly you put them together, and it's quite a magical process. I don't know how that happens, really. It's quite a mystery.
Well, part of it's about leaving your physical body too. I mean, it's a transcendent kind of experience. That's part of it is also the idea that at the time, it was LSD was no longer legal by the time you moved to Berkeley. But I mean, how much of that consciousness expansion had to do with LSD? Even you can personalize it, or you can talk about it from a group context, because there is so much overlap. I mean, it just seemed to me that you had a huge amount of venues, you had a lot of open-minded people, and you had musicians like Garcia who were humble enough to know that, maybe they were great bluegrass banjo players, but they actually needed to work with cats like Merle Saunders in order to get their jazz chops up. So there was a lot of introspection. How much of that had to do with LSD?
The first time I took LSD was probably at my first Grateful Dead concert. Backstage, it was probably, Owsley's finest, and
right.
But of course, the whole thing was quite remarkable. And then, and at just a moment, I think that I started to come on. I was standing next to the gentleman who lit off the fireworks, and so there was all of a sudden a big. One second I was backstage in this like a remarkable concert of music happening, and then the next moment I was like sort of being flung through space from the force of the explosion, and the universe was totally white as far as the eye could. It was just like, so I was kind of flying through the air, and everything was quite peaceful. And then I kind of came back to the earth and was back at this concert, and everything started again, fresh. So I would say that freshness, to be able to hear things as though you had never heard them before, and to experience things without, kind of to experience music without whatever kind of concepts or baggage you have about, well, I don't like this, or I don't like that, or I do, our usual thing of judgmental.
Sure, right, of course.
But you judgmental, and sort of to release yourself from that. I think that certainly LSD facilitates that in a person's life. At some point, though, I don't take LSD, I don't do that. It just never comes around when I'm going to take LSD. But certainly it stays with you.
This is fast. It's just having a ball here with Brian Godchaux. My show revolves around the 4 L's: leadership, love, life, and lineage. And I wanted you to talk about, when I talk about life, I'm talking about overcoming adversity. And I people can say what they want about Keith and Donna's, the end of their tenure with the Grateful Dead. But when in doing some research, Keith was actually, it sounds to me that he was experiencing a bit of a rebirth and was in a very good place in his life before his tragic death. And I wanted you to talk about, ultimately, how did the Grateful Dead change Keith, and then where he was at in his life when he perished, and then how it affected you, and how it made you a stronger person, and how it motivated you to keep carrying the torch.
Well, of course, when Keith died, it was just a horrific tragedy. Kind of at the time, I said, well, other things in my life were kind of in upheaval, and I went through a point of like, well, why continue with music? What's this dream about? Certainly, there'd been some twists and turns, and a lot of the twists and turns were quite painful. And for me, I guess at some point I just realized I had to pick myself up, and the way I did that was through music. I just started playing again. Actually, I went back and went back to one of my old teachers and studied classical music for a while, and got back into it. And certainly, music has the power to keep you doing that. And so I'm very grateful to have music in my life and to be a person who is, I guess, calls himself a musician.
Did your brother? You see some videos towards the end of his tenure with the Dead, and he looks completely despondent and not healthy. And I'm just wondering.
Well, he was not yet. Keith had, he had, as far as adversity in his life, music came quite easily to him, but he had some real health problems starting when he was quite young, and some real, in his late teens, some real near-death experiences, and overcoming that. And certainly that changed his, I think when you go through that kind of stuff in your life, it kind of gives you a different perspective.
Right.
And I know that, for example, what happened was he had, as a child, had when he was 3, he had appendicitis and a burst appendix. And the result of that, and quite serious peritonitis, nearly died then. And when he was in his teens, he started having these adhesions, bowel adhesions, which were as a result of that early childhood. And I remember when he got out of high school. He was 18, graduated high school, and went up to, I think it was maybe one of his first out-of-town paying jobs, was playing at the Awanahi Hotel, playing in the bar up there in Yosemite. And while he was up there, he got very, very sick. And my folks had to drive up and drive back. And then for the next couple of years, it was kind of a succession of these illnesses. So, I think he was, the last one, he might have been 18 or 19. And very near death. I mean, peritonitis said he weighed 85 pounds.
My gosh.
Yeah, serious. This was, so, he recovered, miraculously, quite miraculously. They did sort of a Hail Mary operation, and he recovered. And slowly, I think quite of his course in life would have been quite different without that. For example, like, the Summer of Love is coming up here in 1967, and you probably have expected him to have been there, in that period. But in fact, he was, recovering from sickness, and when he got better from that, he was more interested in just kind of making a living, and that's we got more playing the jazz gigs and the jazz trio stuff. So I think that kept him closer to home in the East Bay, rather than really participating early on in the whole Haight-Ashbury thing.
That's right. What was the name of the club in Yosemite? What was the name of that?
The Awanahi Hotel, which was,
how do you spell that?
Years, AWA Awanahi. It was an very old hotel. It had been in down there in Yosemite for many years. It just recently, I think, changed names. It's still there, but there was he managed to got a union membership and found that this job was available, and off he went.
But so was he? But when he left the Grateful Dead, I mean, he started the Heart of Gold band, the original one, or it was called Ghosts.
Yeah,
it's called Ghosts.
Right.
I mean, but was he in a good place at that point? I just think this is so important for the record, because
I think he actually, yes, I think he was getting to a good place. It was quite, it was quite hard, I think, for after the dead experience. He didn't want to play for a while, and he was getting back into wanting to play, and things were kind of coming quite magically together, playing with Greg Anton, and all of a sudden there was this kid, Steve Kimnock, who was around playing, and
That's
it was
right.
like, that was kind of, he was, so there was a band in place that Keith and Donna were involved in, who actually, could have turned into a significant, great band. And, but that was not to be,
I also, I mean, it's while you were going to see the Grateful Dead, or I mean, could you talk a little bit about the kind of projects you were working on while your brother was off? I mean, truly, when he joined the band, it wasn't that they were in severe debt, and also Mickey Hart's dad had ripped the band off. Pigpen was dying, and your brother came in at that point, and they were touring prolifically.
Yeah.
And I just was wondering what if you could talk a little bit about on the parallel what you were doing on that at that time in your career, because I mean this was probably one of the most, I mean it is in my mind one of the most intoxicating and sort of one of the richest times in our musical history.
Well, it was, and in a certain way, I was sort of like a fly on the wall, so to speak. Keith was kind of shy, and I think I was his shy younger brother, even more shy. So I would hang out in that scene and was playing incredibly dynamic, full of remarkable people and musicians. And I don't think I was quite, there as a musician, like to be able to really hang out with these guys. Like I would hang out with them and talk about music, but at that point, so I kind of went off on my own and started playing with bands. And the first I think about in the early '70s was this band called the Rockabilly Rhythm Boys. And
let's hear about this one.
Well, it was a Marin County band, and I was a part. One of them was an old friend of mine, Joe New, who was also an old friend of Keith. So I actually had some history of playing early on with him, and the other guys were, you had the drums and guitar. Tony Johnson was on drums. He had played with Junior Walker in the All Stars. So a remarkable drummer, and Joe New again, and we just played sort of what you would call California rockabilly country, Marin County stuff. And I was trying to figure out, well, how do I play the violin in this? In a real band. While I'm actually playing in a real band, and learning how to do that, and go out and playing gigs and try to find, find a voice.
Right.
Find my voice. That was it. Trying to find my voice on the fiddle, and musically, yeah.
Do you? I couldn't tee up the part on the studio track, "Cats Down Under the Stars." But could you just talk?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about? It's not rocket science, but ultimately, you had obviously had a relationship with Garcia. He was very encouraging to you.
Yeah, yeah.
How did that? Can you talk about your memories of that session? What stood out to you? Because really, for Jerry, go ahead.
It was John Kahn had written these parts, and I got a call from Donna to come down and see if I could play them. And I was married at the time with this woman, Candy, and she was quite a fine player who I'd been playing with in a little bluegrass band. And we came down and learned the parts and played them, and it was quite challenging. They were kind of a sort of orchestral, very classical orchestral sound that John wanted, and it was quite challenging. I'm very glad that Candy was there because she was quite a fine classical player, and somehow we got through it and managed to do it. Quite difficult. Garcia was endlessly patient. I was. Can I try that one more time? Can I try that part?
Oh, he's like, yeah, sure, no problem, man, no problem.
Yeah, right, and it was all great. I think the band, they were in a very good place at that time, and glad to be able to be part of that little moment in history.
Before we let you go, I just wanted you to talk about your concept of love and really how you continue to bring love to this world. You've lived a very interesting life. You've had ups and downs like everybody else, but we're living through a time where I would assert that there's a callousness in the world that we already are in World War III. And I'd just like you to talk a little bit about your concept of love and how you bring love to this world.
We are in very odd times.
Yes.
Historically, I would say.
Yes.
I would say, if you look, I'm a kind of a student of history, and these are definitely different than other times. But unfortunately, a lot of the same bad stuff, it's all the same bad stuff which keeps happening over and over, sort of seems to be part of our human nature. And someone like myself who has a certain knack or ability for playing music, in a position to actually make people feel better. And music is love. And one tries as a musician to take so seriously the responsibility to make the world better through somehow just getting in there and trying your best and trying to connect with one's higher self and higher feelings and make that come out in music. It's not always easy to do, and certainly the world has a real way of getting in the way of that. But yes, music is love.
Brian Godchaux, I hope to meet you in person one day. I really appreciate it. It just was great to hang with you, and
so much.
And I hope you enjoyed it, and continued success.
I did.
Yeah, great. Continued success in your collaborations with Sandy Rothman and beyond.
Thank you so much, Jake.
It was an honor. I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, indeed.
Later on.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Another day here on the Jake Feinberg Show. Heard from Randy Brecker in hour 1, and that was Brian Godchaux in hour number 2. Thanks to Mike Roper for his services, and to Power Talk 1210. Keep it here. Now we're going to be tuning into the show about post-traumatic stress disorder at the top of the hour with a former Marine. We'll be back next week. Until then, peace.